Hello, good evening, friends. I hope you are doing well. It has been a little while since last we met. I think it's been about a month or so. In that time, I'm sure we've all been on many adventures. I myself, as this picture kind of suggests, I've been off in Arizona for a little while, exploring the Wild West, the Grand Canyon, the amazing rocks of Sedona, and it's all inspired my imagination in many, many different ways. And it's good to be back. I wanted to do a little stream while I had the opportunity. And this video is going to be looking at my recent story, Darklands, which was published in the Corncrake magazine. And I'm going to read through this story and then give a little opportunity for questions and answers, questions from the chat and maybe a little bit of commentary on the story. But I just want to say before I begin this kind of audio reading, why I've started writing, because I've always enjoyed stories, and I think for those of you who have come across this channel, you'll know that about me already. I love analyzing and exploring myths and legends, both those of classical and medieval eras, but also more modern tales like The Lord of the Rings. And this has always been something I've enjoyed, but I haven't ever got into the actual creation of stories. I've been mainly focusing on analyzing those great tales that have gone before us. But I'm a very big believer that literature, stories, whether they're in written form or visual or in art as well, they convey to us deep things about reality, which can have a way of kind of expanding, opening the possibilities for what takes place in reality. I'll give you an example of this. So, in I think it was last year, there was a couple of things that came out around the same time. There was the movie Napoleon by Ridley Scott, and the BBC produced a documentary, a two-part documentary on Julius Caesar. Now, both of these uh, film, TV shows, they were aimed at deconstructing their main characters, but they largely failed in that attempt. And what was interesting was that people working independently of one another were both inspired to deal with the subject of the great man and his threat to democracy, you might say. And what struck me about that is actually throughout history, throughout our culture, there seems to be these moments or periods where at the right time, certain ideas or values or archetypes are on the move, and people independently from one another are exploring those things and giving voice to them. And in turn, that almost paves the way for that archetype to become a reality, something that we're foretasting almost. It opens up our horizons and the possibilities which can take place. And so I really believe in the power of storytelling and myth making and so on. So in my own kind of limited way, I've tried to dip my toes into this a bit, and Darklands is my first real attempt to engage in storytelling, and I hope to share now with you what I've done. So let me bring it up. This is from the Corncrake magazine. I would recommend everybody should go and have a look at Corncrake. It's doing great work and collecting a lot of stories, both those from prior generations by people like Charles Dickens and Sir Walter Raleigh, but also people within our sphere, their tales, such as myself. And I was very honoured to have this published in their magazine. So, without further ado, let us begin. The men gazed out into the valley. Before them was darkness. What they beheld was not the shadow of night. No moon shone, no star twinkled. There was not even a cloud in the sky. There was only black tar in the air. It was the air, thick and heavy. It clung to the body like liquid tar. Wind did not disrupt the inky stillness, for its breath never blew in that vale, nor did rain ever fall in that land. On this side of the mountain there was only the deepness of the dark, yet within its depths everything lived, moved, and had its being. Punctuating the darkness that enveloped the valley was the river. Its waters gave off a cold jade light. From the west, the channel snaked its way across the valley towards the eastern end of the dale, where it disappeared into the bowels of the mountain. Its northern shore bled into a desolate marsh, clumps of grassland pierced by luminescent pools, and to its south lay a woodland of withered beech trees. Their branches bore no leaves, and many trunks had been uprooted and left to lie where they fell. Dimly lit by the glow of the river, the forest steadily rose into the hills that ring the southern perimeter of the valley. Two-thirds of the way up the hillside was a clearing in the trees that opened onto a shelf of rock. There the company of dawn watched in silence. To their fore stood a large man grizzled by time and war. Over his left eye was a black patch. To his right he held a spyglass. As he surveyed the dark, he could see white forms scattered across the forest and the swamp beyond. They wandered the wastes alone, loping through the blackness blindly. Now and then a shriek would echo up the valley, interrupting the murmur of guttural hisses issuing from the mysterious white men of the dark. The warrior raised his spyglass towards the mountains. His hair fell upon broad shoulders, his beard resting short of his large chest. He was clad in worn brown and black leathers, with a mottled grey cloak reaching to the midpoints of his calves, held in place by brooches in the shape of a five-pointed star on each shoulder. Upon his feet were battered boots smothered in mud. His footwear matched the greybeard's belt. To the left of his battered belt hung a scabbard, 4 feet in length, sheathing a sword with a large cross-guard and a rounded pommel. On his right side a black metal stave, some 3 feet in length, was attached to his belt. At its end protruded 3 metal prongs, held together by 2 circular bands that proceeded out from the pole. Their points could be construed as the corners of an equilateral triangle. Scanning the darkness, the man's attention was drawn to a spot of white. As it began to grow, he watched with increasing anticipation. Faster and faster it increased in size. Then suddenly the orb began to course its way down the river, heading from the western ridge towards the center of the valley. As it did so, a stream of white, like a comet's tail, followed the spot. "It's here," grunted the man. The other members of the Company of Dawn turned to look as the light began to splinter the black ink of the valley. Including the greybeard, there were 7 in number. Next to the old warrior was a black-haired man wearing a cloak made of raven feathers, a gold ring in his left ear, and a strung bow in his hands. Immediately behind them sat 2 others, short and stocky, perched on rocks. Dressed in leather overalls, they carried giant backpacks. To their left, a young man knelt, clad in a red robe that reached to his ankles, his tonsured scalp covered by a raised hood. On their right was an athletic youth, wearing clothes similar to the greybeard's. A scar ran across his left cheek, which was beardless. His fingers fidgeted with the buckle of his belt. At the very rear stood a large fair-haired warrior, naked to the waist. Bushy was his beard, merging into one with his hairy and muscular torso. He carried only an axe by his side. The white spot was travelling quicker than when the old warrior had first noticed the blot. He no longer needed his spyglass, for with every second the ball of white grew larger. As it came closer, the light arced in a downward motion. The earth began to shake. Across the forest, trees fell. Far below the watching company, panic screams filled the dark. The ball of white exploded in size as it hurtled through the dark sky. The company could now see the spot for what it was: a silver rock surrounded and followed by white flame. Before them it plunged, crashing into the center of the marsh. A chorus of howls greeted the intrusive visitor. Then all fell silent once more. It is time. Our task is at hand. We must go at once. Without a word, the company of Dawn obeyed the old man's command. Forming into single file, the 7 men left the platform and made their way down the hillside towards the river. At their helm was the raven-cloaked man. Silently he led them through the leafless trees, tall, spindly giants clothed with pallid grey bark. Every so often he brought the column to a halt with a raise of his clenched fist. As they waited, the company could hear gurgles, groans, and the snap of branches around them. But they never saw what made these sounds. Towards the bottom of the hill, they were halted once more. The hissing and shambling were more persistent in this part of the wood. After crouching for several minutes, their legs began to tire. The young man with the scarred face struggled to keep his balance. His sinews were stretched, his concentration pushed to the edge. He could remain still no longer. He had to ease the tension in his muscles. With a slight movement, the beardless soldier shifted the weight of his feet. As he did so, there was a large crack. He looked down. A branch was broken in twain. A screeching howl pierced the silent blackness. Bounding towards them came a white figure, its skeletal, humanoid form accentuated by its gangly limbs. The creature's hands and feet ended in chiseled claws, and it wore around its waist a tattered cloth. It came to a sudden stop before the trees hiding the company. Sticking a forked tongue out in several directions, it began moving its head in a jerking, mechanical motion as it began to search for that which had disrupted the constant thrum of gurgled hisses. Its large, dark green eyes, which were fixed on the sides of its head, did not move. The black slits stared with the animal cunning as the creature's red tongue flicked in and out between rows of razor teeth. More of the white creatures bounded towards the sound of the snap. They lurched from tree to tree, groping on the trunks to propel themselves in the direction of their target. The company held their breath. They could hear the creatures sniffing. In place of noses, they had 2 small holes for nostrils. 5 of the creatures had been drawn forth. The greybeard turned and motioned to the large, fair-headed man. The old warrior pointed ahead. Without a noise, the blonde leapt forward. Raising his axe with one hand, he came about the tree. The foremost creature turned with excitement towards the sudden movement. As it raised its head, the man brought down his axe, cleaving its skull in 2. The commotion drew the attention of the pale creatures. With shrieks of surprise and fury, they rushed towards the axeman. Turning to the 5 at his front, he charged forward, swinging his axe in the air above his head. A long arm reached from his left and was met by the razor edge of the axe blade. It fell limply to the ground, severed from its owner. The axeman twirled the weapon round to his right as a row of teeth lunged towards his back. The axe sliced through the creature's face, sending the beast's jaw sailing into the empty canopy of the forest. Two more pale beasts pounced upon their foe, and they used their combined weight to drive him to the ground. Pinning the bare-chested warrior on his back with their powerful limbs, the creatures plunged their fangs towards the man's flesh. The man raised his axe arm to meet the throats of his attackers, holding the frenzied beasts at bay. His free hand searched the ground for a rock or branch to hit his foes, but none was forthcoming. As man and beast struggled, the creatures were beginning to force the man's axe arm downwards. He could not hold out much longer. Soon they would overpower him. With a sudden jolt, the creature on his left went limp. It rolled off his body, dislodged by an arrow, trimmed with raven feathers, lodged in its eye. The other wretch threw itself more fully onto the axeman's chest, but without its companion, the pale creature could not contain the strength of its foe. Together they rolled across the forest floor, claw and axe blade locked in a frenetic duel. With a powerful swipe, the creature caught the man's chest. Using its momentum, it swung its body around and straightened its arm, hurling him several feet high. As the warrior flew up, he raised the axe above his head. Then he crashed into the creature below, bringing the weapon down with both hands into its belly. With a squeal of pain, its body violently shook. Then it froze. Stepping out from behind the trees, the greybeard approached the axeman. Offering a hand, he asked, "Are you wounded?" The warrior grinned, grasping the old man's arm and rising to his feet. "Those boys gave me a fair beating. A few cracked ribs, a tear of the flesh here or there. A good warm-up. I'm ready for more." "You will get your desire for battle fulfilled soon, Egbert. Of that I have no doubt," chuckled the greybeard. "But we must not linger here any longer. Hugin," the raven-cloaked man looked to attention, "lead us forth once more." Like a coiled spring, Hugin leapt to his feet and, with bow and arrow in hand, started towards the river, the rest of the company following close behind. It was not long before they reached the banks of the river. Before them lay an emerald grassy verge, which gave way to deep waters some 60 yards wide. A small jetty, to which a weathered rowing boat was tied, jutted into the river. The skiff was fitted with 3 benches and 6 oars. In twos the men took their positions, with the old warrior taking hold of the tiller. The sheer strength of the current left the crew hard pressed to stay on course. Arriving at the other side without incident, much to the company's relief, they disembarked onto a landing stage similar to the one they had left. As the young man with the scarred cheek made his way off the quayside, the greybeard addressed him. "Sister son, stay here with the boat. Have it ready for our return. We will need to depart with haste." With a sigh, the beardless youth turned back to the boat, while the rest of the company made their way northwards towards their prize. Once more the Hugin led the way, steering the company at a fast pace on a course through the marshes. Running over wet grass and leaping over pools, they managed to traverse the swamp without entering its still, luminescent waters. Not a sound could be heard save the splash of footsteps. The hissing and snarling of the woods had evaporated into an unnatural silence that hovered over the fens. As they approached the centre of the marsh, they spied a small island within the waters. It was barren of all but the short, yellow grass that marked its surface. The isle gently rose to a raised circle at its midpoint. They could see a fresh hollow plunged into the raised plateau. Above the lip of the crater, a large rock, diamond in shape, was releasing white smoke from its body. It gave off an intense heat, disrupting the cold of the dark. Beads of sweat trickled down the necks and backs of the men. It was a furnace. When they reached the smouldering stone, the greybeard spoke. Egbert, take your axe to the south of the island. Hugin, march your bow towards the north. Keep a watch on the perimeter. Brithwold and Edmund, get to work. Stay by my side, Alcuin. At that, the company split. The two stocky men, Brithwold and Eadmund, went towards the rock. They set their packs on the ground and began emptying the contents. Donning leather gloves and metal masks, they began to assemble a contraption, slotting many mechanical parts together. In a few minutes, they had assembled the device. A great chisel, several feet in length, protruded from its end and was joined near its base by a set of rotating handles. These sat on top of a solid metal block. Eadmund placed the point of the chisel against the rock. He held the instrument in place while Brithwold twisted the handles in a circular motion. Each turn increased the tension of the device as its base began to rise upwards, away from the chisel. With a last twist, the steel hammer was fully raised, held to the handles by a tight, thick rope. With a sudden motion, Brithwold let go. The metal block rammed into the chisel, driving it into the surface of the rock. With a resounding crack, the metal struck the stone, driving into its surface by several inches. As Brithwold and Eadmund reset the contraption, Egbert and Hugin patrolled the boundaries of the island. The clattering of the hammering device began to attract unwanted attention. Where once there was silence, now a faint hiss could be heard, and the waters of the swamp were shifting. Small ripples started to travel in strange directions. Hugin was the first to see the cause of the disturbance. A head with eyes dark and green floated noiselessly towards him, lined with rows of sharp teeth. Its gangly arms and pale torso began to rise gently from the greasy waters. Steadily, it made its way towards him, emerging from the languid pool. Unlike the creatures of the forest, this pale beast wore armor. Its clothing was not dissimilar to those worn by the greybeard, though they were marked by the emblem of a green snake. Swishing his feathers aside, Hugin notched his bow with a raven-feathered arrow and, with a quick draw, aimed at the white creature. With a thwack, the arrow hit the wretch's forehead, sending it once more into the waters from whence it came. As the pale figure was felled, more creatures were rising from the water, drawn towards the sound of the hammering that rang out across the marshes. Some donned war gear emblazoned with the sigil of the snake. Others were dressed in robes of purple and gold, carrying serpent-shaped staffs. A few of the pale creatures were of great size, standing some 18 feet above the ground. They were accompanied by smaller beasts who crawled on all fours. Some were misshapen abominations with tentacles and bulbous saws protruding from their backs and necks. As they made their way towards the island, those in the north were met by arrow after arrow. Egbert greeted those who reached the southern shore with his axe blade. Brithwold and Eadmund continued to chisel deeper into the rock. The greybeard stood by, unbuckling the pronged stave from his waist. Alcuin dropped to his knees, muddying his red robe. Clasping his hands before him, he began to breathe deep, slow breaths. How much longer? Asked the old warrior. 2 more turns and we will have it open, answered Bridwald. The greybeard looked to the north. The white creatures were beginning to swarm Hugin, who had been forced to discard his bow in favour of a curved black sword. Leaping between blows, the raven-cloaked man performed an elegant dance, carving his foes with ruthless precision. Turning to the south, the old warrior saw Egbert. The axeman seemed to have grown in stature. His arms and chest were hairier. He growled like a bear. With forceful strokes he crushed the skulls of the wretches. With a roar he threw himself at 2 giants, thrusting them beneath the dark green waters. He alone emerged, hurling himself at more pale men. But the dread horde of wretches kept coming. Several pushed their way past the warriors towards the hammering at the rock. Clunk went the machine, striking once more into the hot stone. Unrushing creatures howled at the sound of the blow, and with manic ferocity began to converge upon the company, hurtling towards their prey with leaps and bounds. But this time the contraption had done its work. The boulder began to crack all along its spine. With a mighty tear it rent in 2. Eadman and Brithwold pulled back just as a crackling white flame exploded up from the rock. Swirling, it began to rise from the stone, forming an ethereal sphere. It hovered above the hollow, casting a searing light. The warriors stood transfixed by the beauty of the flame, its brightness pushing back the darkness. The pale creatures reeled, falling to the ground. The fire burned their eyes. They only knew the blackness of the valley. A voice, emanating from the star, began to speak. It blended 2 pitches within itself, a deep, masculine thunder and a higher, feminine birdsong. The words it spoke were from a strange language, unlike anything spoken in the lands ruled by the greybeard and guarded by the Company of Dawn. But Alcuin, sitting in a state of meditation, began to translate. Hail, men from beyond the mountain! The Lord of Stars greets thee. You wander in a land of night. Many have become blind. They have abandoned the ways of your ancestors and have embraced the deepness of the dark. Their punishment is evident. They have become less than men, grasping after shadows. But to you who have remained faithful, I give this great light. May it shine for you where there is only the deepness of the dark. As your forefathers have done before you, receive this gift and rekindle the hearth. Stay true to my light, for I will come and set the stars in the sky once more. With that, the voice ceased. The greybeard raised the pronged stave in his left hand, and the flame drew towards the staff. With a soft movement, it slid into the branded points, transforming the stave into a blazing torch. As it did so, the words spoken by the voice materialized on the staff in the runic letters known to the people beyond the mountains. In wonder, the old man regarded the dancing brightness of the flaming star. As he held the light, the years of care fell from his face, and youthfulness returned to his aged form. Coming to himself, he looked around. Alcuin had left his trance and was getting to his feet. Eadman and Brithwold had drawn their swords and shields. The white creatures were beginning to stir. "Everyone to the boat!" the greybeard cried. Drawing his sword, he sprang towards Egbert, followed by the rest of the company. In the rear came Hugin, darting past the stunned bodies of the white men. As they reached the southern tip of the island, the creatures, shaken from their confusion, began to recover. The flame had left them dazed and afraid, but now they had become accustomed to its brightness. Rising to their feet, they rushed towards the company. Hugin, though fleet of foot, could not outrun his doom. As he hurdled a rising pale form, a tentacle burst from its neck and wrapped around the raven-cloaked man's foot. Twisting in the air, he brought his thin black blade down upon the limb, shearing through the mangled protrusion. As he landed on his back, several pale figures pounced. Hugin was engulfed under a writhing mass that screamed with delight. The company did not look back. Onwards they ran, leaping across the sinister pools. Behind them came the horde. From the waters, hands reached up to pull the warriors into the depths. Each man felt his heart pounding within him. A blend of fear, resolve, and mad delight powered him on. The monsters were gaining on the band. First fell Eadwine. He was dragged back into the crowd by cruel claws lodged in his spine. The second was Brithwold. As he leapt between two mounds of grass, a hand reached up from the water and grabbed his ankle. With a mighty effort, he broke free of the manacle around his foot. The momentum took him forward and, landing on the verge, he stumbled, tripping into the dark green water. There was much thrashing, then stillness. The old man, now red-haired and in the prime of youth, with Alcuin and Egbert, continued on through the swamp. They could see the river ahead of them, the way illuminated by the brightness of the flaming star. Before their destination lay a series of grassy paths, 5 men abreast, flanked on either side by stagnant water. Along the track they sprinted, with more white creatures rising from the pools to try to pull them under. The horde raced on behind them, eager to catch their prey. As they were coming round the final bend in the path, they saw the young man waiting by the boat. "Push off, Wiglaf!" bellowed the red-haired man. At once, the beardless warrior set to untying the boat from the dock. As what remained of the company entered the strait before the boat, Egbert turned to face the swarm. "What are you doing?" cried Alcuin. "You won't make it unless I buy you time," roared Egbert. "But you'll die!" screamed the sage. "All that matters is the flame. Go! I will hold them off with what strength is mine." The red-haired man and Egbert locked eyes. The old warrior gave a nod. Then, grabbing Alcuin by his cloak, ran onwards. Brandishing his axe, Egbert began to chant. "As strength weakens, courage must be stronger. As limbs fail, the heart stouter. As life fades, the spirit sterner." With a howl, Egbert plunged into the oncoming storm, crying, "For glory! For the flame!" He held the tide for a moment as the greybeard and Alcuin sped towards the skiff. Yet even his strength could not defy fate. As the axe came down upon a disfigured creature, the blade splintered in two. Throwing the shaft away, Egbert threw his fists into the wretches. He was dragged to the floor by the weight of the crowd, roaring and cursing as he fell. Though Egbert Berson, son of Hraki, slayer of Ritho the giant, had fallen, he had halted the swarm's advance. 30 yards now separated them from the greybeard and the sage, who were themselves halfway to the boat. Pushing his tree-like legs as hard as they would go, the old red-haired warrior barreled towards the dock, Alcuin in tow. But the horde was gaining on them, those on all fours galloping towards the beleaguered men. Ahead of them was Wiglaf, who had begun to row into the river. As he reached the edge, the red-haired man sprung forward, leaping high into the air. With a thud, he landed in the stern. He turned to see Alcuin about to leap from the dock. The old man watched in horror as the priest's robes was caught by vicious hands. A hooked fish, Alcuin was reeled back onto the bank. He screamed as white faces bit into his flesh. The old warrior stared on as his comrade's guts spilled into the river. As several wretches feasted on the sage's corpse, others flung themselves with wild abandon after the boat. Wiglaf shouted to his leader, "What are your orders, my lord?" "Take the tiller, sister son. Follow the stream downriver towards the mountain." "But, my lord, the tunnel is dangerous." "Do as I say. In that cavern we may hope to lose our pursuers." "But at what cost?" murmured Wiglaf as he steered the boat due east. The river was strong, its waters plunging forward with reckless abandon. The skiff surged forth with the current. It wheeled round the bending river. White creatures chased them along the bank, hurling themselves towards the boat with a wild rage. Most could not catch the hurtling craft. Those who came close to the boat lost their limbs to the greybeard's sword. Onwards they sped towards the mountain. As they approached the cliff face, the river straightened as it sped into the mouth of a high but narrow tunnel, no more than 9 yards wide and 20 tall. Like an arrow, the vessel shot through the entrance, leaving the valley behind. No pale men dared to follow. Under the mountain they raced, following the perfectly straight course of the tunnel. The cavern was as black as pitch. Only the star flame revealed the way, its rays illuminating the rough bricks of the passageway's walls. After several minutes, the river suddenly deepened, the tunnel floor descending at a rapid incline, slowing the flow of the stream down to a gentle speed. As the two survivors followed the course of the river, they began to hear a periodic rumbling. At first faint, the sound became louder the further they drew towards the mountain's core. It was deep and beautiful. Soon it was apparent that its source was close at hand. As the pair drifted along the river, a smooth, low voice spoke in the darkness. 7 there were who entered the vale. Now only 2 remain. Where are they, Theodulf, son of Theodoric? For what cause will they no longer feel the warmth of a woman? Warrior after warrior has made this journey, and yet the light continues to fade. All this pain for naught. This is my age, the time of the dark. I am the ruler of this land. My reign will have no end. The Lord of Stars has been banished. The endless night has come, and all things will turn to black. Many are my servants. They wear my sigil in battle. More will join, until all the world is under my domain. Even the Lord of Stars will be dragged into my domain at the end of all things. This doom has been foretold. It was woven in the weave of the 3 sisters. Unmoved, the greybeard and Wiglaf carried on. Ahead, the waters began to churn. Why prolong the suffering? Is there anything to be gained? Let go. Surrender the flame. Embrace the darkness and be freed from your chains. Struggle will cease. I shall grant you rest. You lie, hissed Theodulf, lifting the torch with his left hand. Before the skiff, the waters started to bubble. The boat began to violently rock, Wiglaf grabbing the sides of the craft to stay steady. The tunnel started to shake. The waters were parting. A serpent's head, twice the size of a man, rose from the depths. Its long neck rose through the foam until the dark green scales of its gigantic face towered over the boat. Wiglaf gasped. Theodulf maintained his steely gaze. The humongous snake turned an emerald eye towards the red-haired man. Will he ever come? How much misery must your children endure before you see that the world has turned, that the age of light will not return? Give up the fire, Theodulf. Theodulf stood frozen. He stared into the great snake's eye. He tried to move his arm, but his muscles would not respond. He attempted to speak, but his lips could not move. Seized as he was, the fingers on the torch began to relax. The stave started to slip towards the waters. Theodulf felt a hand clasp around his loosening grip. Remember yourself, my lord. Look at the inscription. At the voice's command, Theodulf gazed down at the words on the torch. Receive this gift and rekindle the hearth. Stay true to my light, for I will come and set the stars in the sky once more. With a sudden flush of power, he was aware of himself again. He clasped the torch tightly. Wiglaf let go. Drawing his sword, he addressed the brutes before him. The fates may have doomed the crashing of the world. Perhaps the flame will perish, and all will be shrouded in darkness. So be it. With what strength is left in me, I will fight for the hearth. I will fight for the dawn. Never let it be said that Theodulf, son of Theodoric, gave up the life of the stars for the death of the dark. With these words, the mighty Theodulf leapt towards the great serpent, blade pointed at the foe of all men. In a swift motion, the snake's coils burst from the river, slamming the warrior against the tunnel wall. Landing prone in the boat, he rolled onto his back, just as the serpent's jaws came rushing down towards him. Rolling forward, Theodulf jumped onto the stern, narrowly avoiding the monster's jaws, exposing the creature's neck. Theodulf jumped onto his assailant. He was greeted by the foul stench of its slime-ridden body. Grappling with the beast's immense power, he began to strike with his sword, but the creature's scales repelled the blows. Roaring in wrath, the serpent's coils started to wrap around the large man's waist. Tightening, the loops wrenched him free. Theodulf struggled, bringing his sword down upon the trunk around him. It had no effect. He could not cut the snake's scales. As the monster crushed his bones, the breath escaped his lungs. Pain shot through his body, and the edges of his vision began fading into blackness. Running along the skiff, Wiglaf soared from the prow. He arced towards the creature's face. In a downwards motion, he thrust his blade into the serpent's left eye. Steel penetrated deep into the soft globe, bursting the organ. The snake roared in pain and loosened its stranglehold on Theodulf, who slumped onto the boat. The serpent tossed its head around, with Wiglaf clinging to the blade lodged in its skull. From side to side he flew, smashing against the roof of the tunnel. With a sudden thrash, the beast dove down into the water, arising once more without the beardless Wiglaf. Before him was Theodulf, poised on one knee. He looked into the snake's eyes. Devourer of worlds, if you want the flame, come and get it. With jaw open wide, the serpent's head hurtled down. At the same moment, Theodulf stood up and raised the torch. He thrust the flame within the beast's maw. The snake bit down, wrenching Theodulf's arm clean off. Blood spurted forth, and, with a cry, the old warrior fell back in pain. The serpent, with a great gulp, consumed the torch, then hovered over the wounded man as a ball of light descended inside of its body. A horrible laughter erupted from the serpent that bounced off the walls of the tunnel in a dreadful cacophony. Theodulf moaned, but the white ball was growing inside the serpent, spreading throughout its body. Smoke started to pour from its mouth. Laughter turned to screams. Writhing in agony, the snake repeatedly plunged itself into the water. Flames leapt from the monster's nostrils and eye sockets. Teeth and scales shot out. The serpent rose straight out of the river, tall and stiff. Then it exploded. Thereafter, there was stillness. Only the gentle lapping of the waters could be heard. The stench of guts littered the tunnel. Floating above the dark green waters was the torch, still held by Theodulf's severed arm. As the serpent's corpse sank beneath the current, Wiglaf surfaced. Spluttering, he pulled himself towards the skiff. He saw Theodulf lying still. Next to him floated the torch, held in place by the severed arm. A small white flame flickered at its summit. Closing his master's eyes, Wiglaf sat himself at the tiller. Grabbing the torch in his right hand, he lifted the star to light the way ahead. He steered the boat forward, alone in the dark. So that is Darklands, the tale that I wrote and was published in the Corncrake. And we have a little bit of time if anybody wanted to put any comments or questions in the chat. As I think you'll be able to, for many of you, will be able to see that there are several kind of allusions to other tales, drawing on various mythic motifs and kind of blending them together. We've got a bit of Egyptian, Greek, and Norse and Saxon literature featuring in this. So there's a lot of different kind of elements being brought together here in these characters, and indeed many of the character names come from Anglo-Saxon and Norse poetry, which kind of, I always feel, it gives a bit of kind of weight to it, and it gives you a kind of sense of what kind of characters they are. Tolkien did the same thing, actually. I remember reading in the Volsunga saga one day. I think it was, or no, it's the Volupsa, sorry. It was the Volupsa, one of the great poems of the Norse. And there's this part where it names all the dwarves in the creation. And what's striking is how many of them are used by Tolkien in The Hobbit. The dwarves in The Hobbit are named after the dwarves in the Volupsa, which is quite a lovely touch. Yes, I was quite inspired by even that technique of Tolkien's, never mind things that might have been in his stories or certain phrases or moments. We have some comments. Good to see Evelyn Sunglasses, Ben Wheeler, North Sea. Good to see you, North Hooker. Hope you're doing well. Call of Shield Maiden, who is the editor of the Corncrake, doing fantastic work, editing and putting together magazines that come out every month. It's quite. I'm really impressed with what she's managed to do. It's a difficult thing getting so much good quality material together, getting writers to produce stuff on time on a consistent basis, and it's just going from strength to strength. So yes, I should do this for the stories in the future as well. And on that note, I should say, well, there's two things to look forward to. One is that in next month's edition of the Corncrake, I'll have another story. It's not a continuation of Darklands. It's independent of that. Uh, I think it's you'll see though it's drawing on other kinds of myths which don't feature here. And beyond that, though, I do hope to return to Darklands. I feel like there's a whole world here that could be explored more fully and deeply. There's more stories to tell, to use a cliche, and I think there's a lot that could be done. Exploring, the Company of Dawn. Who are they? What are they defending, and so on. The Serpent. How has he got such power? What does he mean it's his age, and how did the world come to this point? Does this imply there was an age before ruled by the Lord of Stars, and so on and so forth? So there's more that could be explored in different times and settings within this world too, because this is just a snapshot uh, of it, really, an episode which seems to have been, um, you know, an episode which has been repeated before. We kind of get a hint of that. There's a bit where the Lord of Stars is addressing the men, and he kind of tells them to rekindle the hearth as your forefathers had done before you. So there's this kind of implication that perhaps there's a cyclical aspect to this world where this is a repeated ritual or cycle that takes place. We may even wonder if somebody like Wiglaf will be the one to take up the mantle next time, or whether it's his descendants which will do it. And that's very much in keeping with these Norse stories. Um, I'll give folks a little bit longer just in case anybody's got anything they want to ask. If not, we'll wrap up soon. Um, well, I'll just say as well that I think it, by my choice of the names and so on, that it's clear that I'm drawing primarily on Saxon and Norse stories to kind of set up this world. And we can see this in the kind of rekindling the hearth being the place of safety, the sanctuary for in the Saxon worldview, and the wilderness beyond being populated by monsters who want to destroy the hearth. That idea very much comes through. And this idea of the last stand, the northern courage fighting against overwhelming odds. We have this kind of berserker character in Egbert. He could easily be Beowulf, or appear in various stories with Hraki. And indeed, I think there's a reference to him in this tale. But there are also older myths as well, which are being drawn on. So, for example, the Great Serpent. Well, he could be. I think he's a blend of several um, characters. We've got the World Serpent in Norse mythology, but we also have. Well, Satan is often presented as a serpent in the Garden of Eden, or the Great Dragon. You have in Egyptian mythology Apep, who is this great serpent who every night tries to devour the barge which Amon Ra, who the bearer of the sun, is transporting in the underworld, basically to bring about an eternal night. And he tries to swallow it, and he tries to. In one occasion, he uses the eye of Apep, the snake's eyes, to entrance Ra, and it's only with the help of his companion that he's able to get out of that. So you can see a parallel with that, and Theodulf and Wiglaf's experience with the serpent here. And I guess we could also you could connect him with various monsters which seek to devour the future of a civilization. Think of like Perseus saving Andromeda from Cetus, um, or George slaying the dragon to defend the princess. In a way, the flame has a similar role. It's going to bring new life to the kingdom. If it dies like the princess, then the king's line dies, or the kingdom dies. And so you could almost connect that with the Holy Grail as well as another symbol of that. When the Fisher King receives the Holy Grail, he is healed, and the land is healed. So you get that kind of idea too in this tale. I would also add as well that along with this kind of more ancient context, I think there's a lot of aesthetic influence from uh, video games like Dark Souls, the graphic novel Berserk, which was an influence on Dark Souls. These a very kind of harsh and unforgiving and twisted world with a lot of gore and absurd horror and very uh, striking and dark. I keep using the word dark, but actually, it's a dark world, but it's also got this very magical aspect to it. Magic might be the wrong word, but very fantastical and different from our own. It has a kind of strangeness to it. And I think you see that in the environment, in these creatures who are maybe a bit like the hollows in Dark Souls, um, and also just the tenor of it. And the snake could be seen as like some of the snake figures in Dark Souls with his the words and the Age of Dark and so on. So there's a number of influences, and there's many others that I haven't mentioned. No, there's always a danger with when you analyze something, you can sometimes kill the spirit of it. But I hope it's more uh, suggests that this stands in a tradition rather than a independent of it. That's very much my imagination's been very much informed by these great legends from the past that were held dearly by other civilizations. And my hope is that in some way I've kind of re-expressed them in a powerful way, in a new way as well, for a new story, which we will revisit in the future. Well, before I go then, and I'll give you a little update. The So I won't be streaming too much in the next month or so. I have a couple of big things at the moment. So, as many of you know, I launched a tour company, which is going really well, leading guided walks around Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, getting a fair number of customers now and getting good reviews and building connections. And it's kind of at that stage where it's about, I think it's getting to that point where the first stage, the real foundations have been nearly built. And so that's going really well. But it takes a lot of time, a lot of preparation each time, and so that kind of puts a limit on streaming. But then also, I've been very fortunate to have been chosen as one of the speakers at this year's Witten in the end of August, and so I need to be writing my speech for that, or planning my speech for that. And I have several ideas. The kind of outline is nearly there. The fundamental thesis is pretty much solidified in my mind, but I just need to focus on that because it's a big deal. Like to be chosen, there's a lot of strong competition. I know some of the people who put in pitches and they have brilliant minds and very inspiring things to say, things which are very worthwhile to listen to. So to have been chosen amongst their rank is a real privilege, and I want to be able to say something which really contributes something of some import or significance for those in attendance, something which can help guide us moving forwards. So I need to really devote my energies to that when I'm not working in the tour business and in other things. So that's going to take a lot of time. So I won't be around too much, unfortunately, but I hope to be back soon. Maybe not leave it so long. And yes, in the meantime, I'll also be writing a bit more new stories as well. Will be coming out in future months and so on. All that remains for me to say then is thank you all for listening. I really appreciate you taking an hour to listen to my story, and please put your comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this tale and uh, how, what ideas it's given you and whether you have any questions about it. I'd really love to have your engagement. And yes, I'm very grateful to you for listening. Thanks again. God bless you, whoever you are, wherever you are. Bye for now.